In the vast, unfeeling void of space, where optimism and oxygen were equally sparse, the fortress ship Luminary Sentinel floated like a stubborn turd in a zero-gravity toilet. A marvel of human engineering, they'd said, as if humans had ever marveled at anything sober. Perpetually orbiting a freshly discovered star system nobody had yet bothered to name, because what was the point, really? Captain Vesper Callahan sat in her command chair with the air of someone who'd just found a suspicious stain on their favorite sofa. "I swear if I get one more encrypted message about another damn alien coalition, I'm going to find the nearest airlock and just," Vesper muttered, letting the thought hang like an uninvited relative at Christmas. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Garth Pillar, the kind of man who looked like he shaved with a cheese grater for the hell of it, leaned back in his chair. "You could try. But then who'd keep this floating scrap heap running?" "I'm sure the ship AI could do better," Vesper replied, an eyebrow arching like a skeptical bridge. "At least it doesn't argue with me." "Yet," Garth countered, smirking, "give it time. You know what they say about artificial intelligence and a midlife crisis." Around them, the bridge buzzed with the sort of low-level panic that radiated from people who understood exactly how dangerous the words routine patrol really were. Screens flickered with data that almost made sense if you squinted at it sideways and imagined you'd been concussed recently. Chief Communications Officer Marta Riggs, a woman whose personality was as prickly as a cactus in a heat wave, tapped a screen with a finger that could probably crack a walnut. "Captain, another encrypted message just came through. Seems our alien friends are playing hide and seek with their intentions again." Vesper exhaled with the kind of tired resignation usually reserved for marathon runners realizing they took a wrong turn miles back. "Sure, because what's space without a little subterfuge? They seem worried about our willingness to make extreme sacrifices," Marta added, rolling her eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't detach. "Guess they heard about the last barbecue. It's not our fault they mistook well done for sacrificial offering," Garth quipped. "Besides, they started it with their peaceful armada nonsense." Vesper had a talent for snorting derisively that she put to good use. Peaceful armada, like calling a nuke a heated disagreement. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "All right, let's see what kind of paranoia-inducing, half-baked nonsense they're sending us now." The message unfurled on-screen, a series of symbols and glyphs that looked like a graphic designer's fever dream. Marta, curse her competence, was already decrypting it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "They've been watching us," Marta reported with a sigh. "Apparently they're concerned about what they call our reckless bravery." Vesper chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Reckless bravery, I prefer to call it having no other options. They seem to think we might do something drastic if cornered," Marta continued, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "as if we'd ever act irrationally." "Us? Irrational?" Garth chimed in. "Perish the thought." The Luminary Sentinel hummed beneath them, a gentle reminder of its presence, like a cat that occasionally remembered it existed. Vesper tapped her comms link, broadcasting to the entire ship. "Crew of the Luminary Sentinel, this is your less-than-beloved captain speaking. Our alien observers seem to be under the impression that we're planning on doing something drastic." There was a pause filled with a kind of collective, bemused silence before she continued. "Let me just say, they are not entirely wrong. So stay sharp, because if we're going to do something stupid, we're damn well going to do it together." The response was a chorus of affirmations, more amused than concerned, because if there was one thing this crew could do, it was find humor in the face of certain doom. Garth leaned in, lowering his voice as if the very walls might have ears. "So, what do you think, Cap?" Vesper shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of an entire species' cynicism. "I think we need to figure out what these aliens are so worried about before we blunder our way into confirming all their fears." "Ah, good, a plan," Garth said, nodding. "Because God knows we can't go 5 minutes without one of those." "It's not much of a plan," Vesper admitted. More of an outline, a vague inkling. Vague inklings are my favorite, Marta piped up, smiling a smile that had seen its fair share of bar fights. They're less likely to get you court-martialed. Exactly, Vesper agreed, her expression softening just a fraction. And with any luck, this one's just vague enough to work. As the luminary sentinel continued its orbit, a silent sentinel keeping watch over secrets it had yet to uncover, Vesper and her crew couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the horizon of known space. And whatever it was watching them back, with interest. But for now, they were content to wait, to watch, and to joke, until the moment came when they'd need to remind everyone why humans were best left undisturbed. The moment wouldn't be long in coming. There was another encrypted message incoming, tagged urgent with a dedication that seemed to say, "For when you're really ready to panic." Vesper smirked at the notification. "Well, aren't we popular today?" "Garth opened that for me. Let's see what fresh hell awaits us." Garth obliged, tapping a few keys with his usual nonchalance. The screen flickered, revealing a new message from their ever-watchful pen pals. It read, "Humans, we have observed your capacity for destruction and wish to understand if you truly intend to engage in such extremes. It's like they think we're some kind of cosmic kamikaze," Garth said, shaking his head. "Honor-bound to blow ourselves up just to make a point." "If only they knew," Vesper replied dryly. "We don't need much of a point." "We're more of an exclamation mark kind of species," Marta snickered. "Think we should invite them over for tea? Maybe show them we're not so bad once you get past the sarcasm and self-destructive tendencies, and ruin the mystery," Vesper scoffed. "Where's the fun in that?" The crew continued their chatter, the kind of banter that had seen them through tough scrapes before and likely would again. It was comforting in a way to know that no matter how bizarre or dire the situation, they could always count on Gallo's humor to see them through. As the luminary sentinel drifted onward, its crew united in their irreverence and resolve, Vesper couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Whatever it was, she'd face it with the same mix of skepticism and wit that had gotten her through life's various absurdities. And if things got truly dire, well, at least she'd go out laughing. "All right, people," Vesper called, standing up with renewed determination. "Let's get to the bottom of this. We've got aliens to confuse and misunderstandings to perpetuate." There was a cheer, half-hearted but there, because that was the spirit of humanity, stubborn, irreverent, and just a little bit unhinged. As they set to work, decrypting, deducing, and preparing for whatever came next, the luminary sentinel continued its lonely vigil, a fortress in the stars, ready to face whatever weirdness the universe decided to throw their way. And in the silent, infinite expanse of space, it was clear that things were about to get interesting. The luminary sentinel, that marvel of modern engineering with all the grace of a brick in a snowstorm, floated quietly in space, doing its best impersonation of a neglected orbital fortress. Inside, Captain Vesper Callahan toyed with the idea of banging her head against the nearest console. It might be more productive than listening to the endless barrage of encrypted messages about alien coalitions and their paranoid delusions. "Marta," Vesper said, her tone resembling that of a long-suffering parent asking a child for the umpteenth time to stop trying to stick forks in electrical sockets, "do we have any more love notes from our overly cautious pen pals?" Marta Riggs, chief of making electronic mumbo-jumbo intelligible, looked up from her console, her expression a study in perpetual irritation. "Oh, we've got plenty. They're basically writing a novella about their fear of our supposed capacity for self-sacrifice. You'd think we're a cult waiting for a comet." Lieutenant Garth Pillar, ruggedly handsome in the way a bulldog might be if it hadn't slept in days, snorted from across the bridge. "Well, nothing says welcome to the neighborhood like assuming your neighbors are nuts," Vesper sighed, a sound thick with the tired wisdom of someone who's seen far too many things go sideways. "I swear, if they think we're going to kamikaze ourselves just to make a point, They clearly haven't seen our maintenance budget. We'd never waste anything so valuable. Marta chuckled. Maybe they should just worry about our lack of resources then. We might blow up just from neglect. Garth leaned back, arms folded like a man settling in for a long, sarcastic ride. So what's the plan, Cap? Do we send them a fruit basket with a note that says, "Relax, we're not suicidal, just thrifty"? You're assuming we have fruit, Vesper replied, eyeing the nutrient paste packs piling up in the corner of the bridge. But no, I think it's time we dig a little deeper. Let's send out some probes. See what these aliens are really up to while they're busy watching us like we're reality TV. The crew busied themselves with preparations, the hum of the ship growing a tad louder as if it had its own opinions on the matter. Marta tapped away, sending out the commands to release the probes. They were sleek, efficient little machines designed to gather data while being as unobtrusive as possible, like the universe's worst spies. Probes are away, Marta confirmed, her voice steeped in professionalism tempered by barely concealed disdain for their situation. They'll start sending back data soon. If the aliens sneeze, we'll know what color it is. Great, Vesper said with a wry grin. Maybe we can sell them tissues afterward. Garth chuckled, the sound as rough as sandpaper but oddly comforting. You know, if they are so worried about our destructive tendencies, you'd think they'd offer us some tech. You know, to coax us into not blowing ourselves up. Or, Vesper retorted, they're secretly hoping we take ourselves out of the equation. Makes the whole galactic peace thing a lot simpler when the most unpredictable element removes itself. That's one way to solve interstellar diplomacy, Marta added dryly, her fingers dancing across her console as she monitored the data streams coming from the probes. As the crew settled into their roles, the luminary sentinel continued its vigil, the only sound the persistent hum of machinery and the occasional muttered curse as someone inevitably stubbed a toe in the dim lighting. Hours ticked by with all the urgency of a slug in molasses, until Marta's console beeped, a noise that would have been innocuous if it didn't herald potential doom. "Captain," she said, drawing out the word like the opening note of a suspenseful symphony, "we've got something." Vesper moved to her side, peering at the data display. It was a jumble of numbers and symbols, the kind that made sense only if you'd been drinking heavily or had a degree in advanced gibberish. "What am I looking at?" "Fragmented signals," Marta replied, her eyes scanning the readouts with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a particularly tasty mouse. "They're all over the place, but there's a consistent pattern. It's like they're trying to figure out just how crazy we are." Garth leaned over, peering at the data with a skeptical eye. "So they're basically taking bets on whether we'll blow a gasket and take half the sector with us." "Pretty much," Marta agreed. "They seem really freaked out by the idea of us making some grand gesture of self-sacrifice. I think they are worried we'll do something drastic if pushed." "Fantastic," Vesper said, rubbing her temples as if she could massage the stupidity out of the universe. "So what's their plan?" "Sit back, watch, and hope we don't have a bad day. Seems like it," Marta replied, "but there's something else." She highlighted a section of the data, bringing it into sharper focus. "They're not the only ones watching us. There's another signal much weaker, almost buried under the others." Vesper frowned, the expression settling on her face like an old acquaintance. "Another player in the game." "Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated." Garth shrugged, his nonchalance almost enviable. "Well, at least we're popular." "Nothing like being the center of unwanted attention," Vesper muttered, her mind racing with the implications. "All right, let's keep monitoring the probes. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The crew set to work with a sense of grim determination, the kind that came from knowing they were likely one bad decision away from disaster. But that was the job, and they were damn well going to do it with a smile, or at least a sarcastic grimace. As the luminary sentinel continued its orbit, the crew watched the data streams, the bridge lit by the flicker of screens displaying information that might, just might, hold the key to their survival. It was an uneasy wait, filled with the kind of tension that came from knowing you were being watched by forces both known and unknown. Hours slipped by, the probes sending back data with the kind of regularity that made Vesper wonder if they were more reliable than her crew. Not that she'd ever say that out loud, not when she had a reputation to maintain. "Captain," Marta called, breaking the silence that had settled over the bridge like a shroud. "The probes are picking up something new. Energy signatures, unusual ones." Vesper moved to her side again, her curiosity piqued. "Show me." Marta brought up the display, the energy readings dancing across the screen in vibrant colors. "These signatures don't match anything in our database. They are different." Garth raised an eyebrow, his interest evident despite his casual demeanor. "Different how?" "Like weird alien tech different or about to explode different." "Could be both," Marta replied with a shrug that said she was just as clueless as the rest of them. "But whatever it is, it's big and close." "Close enough to visit or close enough to blow us to kingdom come?" Vesper asked, her tone a mixture of sarcasm and genuine concern. "Hard to say," Marta admitted, her fingers still dancing over the console, adjusting settings and running simulations. "But it's definitely within range of our scanners." Vesper nodded, her decision made. "All right, let's get a closer look. Garth, prepare the ship for a closer scan. I want to know what we're dealing with before it decides to introduce itself with a bang." Garth moved to comply, his expression one of determination tempered by the kind of gallows humor that had seen them through countless scrapes. "Aye, Captain." "Let's hope it's just a friendly neighbor and not a door-to-door salesman with a nuke." The luminary sentinel shifted its course, moving with the grace of a particularly lethargic whale, the engines humming with the effort. As they approached the source of the energy signatures, Vesper's mind raced with possibilities, her instincts honed by years of dealing with the unpredictability of both space and her own crew. As the scans began, the bridge fell silent, each member of the crew focused on their tasks, the air thick with anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, armed with sarcasm, cynicism, and a stubborn refusal to quit. Vesper watched the data streams, her mind a whirl of thoughts and concerns. The aliens' fear of humanity's potential for self-sacrifice was clear, but what wasn't clear was who else was watching them and why. Whatever the answer, she was determined to find it, to understand the true nature of the threat they faced. And maybe, just maybe, prove that humans were more than just a species of reckless, self-destructive maniacs. Or at the very least, convince the aliens that they were slightly less insane than they appeared. As the luminary sentinel continued its approach, Vesper allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Because no matter how dire or bizarre the situation, the crew of the luminary sentinel could handle it. After all, they had sarcasm and wit on their side. And in the vast, unfeeling void of space, that counted for more than you might think. The luminary sentinel drifted through the void with all the enthusiasm of a hungover sloth, engines quietly churning as if they had an opinion on the absurdity of their mission. The crew was gathered on the bridge, eyes glued to the screens as if they could will the data into making sense. Vesper, with her trademark mix of cynicism and sarcasm, broke the silence. "All right, folks, we've got some alien voyeurs playing the let's see if the humans off themselves game," she said, scanning the room like a hawk. "But here's the kicker, there's more than one audience." Garth chuckled, his voice dripping with irony. "Great. We're the interstellar equivalent of a soap opera, complete with drama and questionable decisions. Minus the attractive cast," Marta quipped, not bothering to look up from her console. Her fingers danced like a pianist cranked up on caffeine, deciphering the alien data streams that felt more like an elaborate prank than a strategic threat. "Hey," Garth interjected, feigning offense. "Speak for yourself." Vesper rolled her eyes, the gesture so practiced she could do it in her sleep. "Focus, people. The probes picked up something big and close, like a really nosy neighbor we can't evict." Marta punched a few keys, bringing up a display of energy signatures pulsing with an unsettling rhythm. The signals match a typical alien blockade pattern. They're setting up shop around our solar system, probably to keep us from doing anything too human. The realization settled over the room like a wet blanket. The aliens were paranoid enough to try and box humanity in, like a group of kindergarten teachers who'd decided timeout was the only way to handle a hyperactive toddler with a penchant for fireworks. "So what do we do about it?" Garth asked, leaning against a console with casual indifference that belied the tension in the room. Vesper considered the question, drumming her fingers on the armrest of her chair. "We can't exactly knock on their door and ask them to leave, but we need to know the full extent of their blockade." Marta nodded, her irritation tempered by a sense of duty. "I'll run a deep scan. See what kind of firepower they've brought to the party." "Good," Vesper replied. "And Garth, I want you to prepare a few contingency plans. If they think they can cage humanity like a zoo exhibit, they are in for a surprise." "Like what?" Garth asked, eyebrows raised. "Send them a strongly worded letter or fling nutrient paste at their ships." "More like plan for every eventuality," Vesper said, her tone sharp. "From polite negotiation to whoops, did we just accidentally blow up your ships?" Garth grinned, an expression that was both reassuring and slightly unhinged. "Got it, Captain. I'll start drafting our oops protocols." The crew set to work with grim determination. Marta's fingers flew over her console, each key press a small act of defiance against the universe's habit of throwing curveballs. Garth began scribbling on a data pad, his thoughts wrestling with strategies that ranged from the practical to the absurdly creative. As the luminary sentinel snuck closer to the blockade, the tension among the crew thickened. It was the kind of atmosphere that could only be cut with a really strong drink, the kind usually labeled "do not consume if you value your liver." "Captain," Marta said, breaking the silence with the kind of dramatic timing that would make a theater director proud, "I've got a full readout. The blockade is tight, covering all major transit points. It's like they've planned for every trick we might pull." "Great," Vesper said, sarcasm dripping from her words, "because nothing says we care like complete isolation." Garth rubbed his chin, a smirk playing on his lips. "So, they think we're too volatile to be left unsupervised. Admirable, really, considering our track record." Vesper sighed, contemplating the absurdity of their situation. "They think we're the crazy uncle at a family gathering, unpredictable, liable to start a fire and best kept away from the kids." Marta snorted, shaking her head. "They're not wrong." "Right," Vesper said, refocusing. "We need options, suggestions." Marta tilted her head, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "We could play along. Act like we're oblivious to their little intervention until we can figure out a way to poke some holes in their net." Garth nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Or we could make some noise. Get their attention on purpose, make them think we're up to something big and see how they react." Vesper considered both approaches, the wheels in her head turning with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "Marta, keep gathering data. We need every scrap of information we can get. Garth, prepare a distraction plan, something flashy but not suicidal." "Just enough to make them sweat a little," Garth replied, already spinning ideas in his head like a mad scientist with a penchant for fireworks. The luminary sentinel continued its course, a silent observer in a game that was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Vesper watched the stars, the endless expanse of space, both a comfort and a reminder that they were but a speck in the vastness of the universe. "Captain," Marta called, pulling Vesper from her thoughts. "We've got company." On the screen, a group of alien ships appeared, a small fleet moving with the kind of precision that spoke of well-practiced drills. They were the unwelcome guests at a party nobody had wanted to host. "Looks like they want a word," Garth said, his tone light but his posture tense. Vesper straightened, her expression hardening into that of a leader ready to face whatever nonsense the universe had in store. "All right. Let's see if we can talk our way out of this one." The alien ships approached, their comms crackling to life with the kind of static that suggested they either didn't care about audio quality or were trying to mimic an ancient radio broadcast. The voice that came through was smooth, calculated, a diplomat's voice. "This is Ambassador Vorthax of the Coalition," the voice began, each syllable dripping with diplomatic detachment. "We request a conference with the captain of the Luminary Sentinel." Vesper made a face, the kind that suggested she'd rather eat a bowl of rusty nails than engage in pleasantries, but needs must when the devil drives. "Ambassador Vorthax," Vesper replied, her tone the epitome of forced politeness. "Captain Vesper Callahan of the Luminary Sentinel. To what do we owe the pleasure? We wish to discuss your recent activities and the potential threat they pose to interstellar peace," Vorthax said, as if reading from a script written by committee. Garth muttered under his breath, "Interstellar peace my ass." Vesper held up a hand to silence him, though she couldn't help but agree. "Of course, Ambassador. We're always eager to maintain peace," she said, her words so sweet they could give you cavities. "Then you understand the necessity of the blockade," Vorthax continued, oblivious or indifferent to the sarcasm lacing Vesper's voice. "Absolutely," Vesper replied, her smile so convincing it could sell freezers to Eskimos. "Keeping us from accidentally setting off the fireworks is a considerate gesture." There was a pause, the kind where you could almost hear Vorthax recalibrating his diplomatic responses. "Our intent is not to isolate but to ensure safety." "Right," Vesper said, her patience wearing thin. "And what does that look like, practically speaking?" "Refraining from unsanctioned activities," Vorthax replied, the words as slippery as a greased eel. Vesper exchanged a glance with Garth, who shrugged in that infuriatingly carefree way of his. "We'll do our best to comply," Vesper said, the lie slipping from her lips with practiced ease. The line went dead, leaving the bridge silent save for the hum of the ship and the collective exhalation of the crew. "Well, that was enlightening," Marta said, her voice a perfect blend of cynicism and amusement. "At least we know where we stand," Vesper replied, her mind already churning with the implications of their conversation. "They want us boxed in. No surprise given their paranoia." "How long do we play nice?" Garth asked, leaning back in his chair with the air of someone asking if it was time to open the good whiskey. "Long enough to gather intel," Vesper replied. "And short enough to remind them why humans have reputations as being slightly unhinged." "Sounds like a plan," Garth said, grinning like a Cheshire cat whose cream had just arrived. The crew continued their work, each movement tinged with purpose. The blockade was a problem, and problems demanded solutions. They would find a way to slip through the net, to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. As the Luminary Sentinel held its course, Vesper allowed herself a moment of reflection. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and utterly indifferent. But that was what made it interesting, what made every challenge worth facing. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was turning challenges into opportunities, preferably with a side of sarcasm and a dash of reckless daring. The Luminary Sentinel continued its vigil, a silent guardian in a universe that was as beautiful as it was brutal. The crew watched, waited, and planned, each of them a vital part of the whole. In the end, they would face whatever came next with the same irreverence and ingenuity that had seen them through so many scrapes before. Because in space, nobody could hear you laugh, or scream for that matter. But they were bloody well going to hear humanity roar. The Luminary Sentinel was, in theory, a masterpiece of engineering. In practice, it was a bit like that car you keep patching up because you can't afford a new one. The cloaking technology, however, was one of the few things that hadn't been jury-rigged with duct tape and prayers. And that was what Captain Vesper Callahan was counting on as she gathered her crew in the cramped briefing room, which smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. "So," Vesper began, leaning against the flickering holo table like a reluctant substitute teacher, "we're going to attempt something that falls somewhere between reckless and batshit crazy." Garth Pillar, the ship's resident cynic, smirked. "Ah, my two favorite categories," Marta Riggs, chief of electronic what's-it affairs, rolled her eyes. And here I thought we were aiming for totally suicidal. Vesper ignored the peanut gallery and continued, the plan is simple. We use the cloaking tech to slip past the blockade. Get in, get out, and hope no one notices us. Hope being the operative word, Garth interjected, voice dripping with irony. Because that works so well in every action vid ever. Quiet, Garth, Vesper snapped, trying to convey authority, but mostly just sounding like a harried parent. Marta, tell them about the cloaking system. Marta tapped a few buttons on the table, bringing up a schematic that looked like a cross between a spaghetti monster and a circuit board. The cloaking system isn't perfect, she admitted. It's more of a let's squint and pretend we don't see it kind of deal. If we push it too hard, it'll short out faster than a cheap fireworks display. So, subtlety is key, Vesper concluded, as if anyone on their crew had ever been described as subtle. Subtlety, Garth said, tasting the word like it was a particularly bitter piece of candy. I'll just add that to the list of things we're historically bad at. Do you have a better idea? Vesper challenged, her patience as thin as the hair on an old man's head. Garth grinned, a habit that usually meant trouble was brewing. Nope. I just enjoy watching you pretend we're capable of pulling this off without something exploding. Vesper sighed. Marta, are we set to go? Marta nodded, though her expression was far from confident. As ready as we'll ever be. I've rerouted power from non-essential systems, which means the coffee machine's out of commission. Oh, the humanity, Garth feigned horror, clutching his chest. Next you'll tell me the snack dispenser's offline too. Vesper shook her head, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips despite the stakes. All right, let's get this show on the road. Stations, everyone. The bridge was a flurry of activity, each crew member slipping into their roles with the kind of practiced chaos that only came from years of doing the impossible with too little. Vesper settled into her chair, the old leather creaking ominously beneath her. Engage cloaking, she ordered, as if she was the captain of a sleek, cutting-edge battleship instead of a patchwork fortress on the brink of a midlife crisis. Marta's fingers danced across her console. A hum filled the air as the Sentinel's cloaking system sputtered to life, casting a shimmering veil over the ship. Visuals indicate cloak is operational, Marta reported, though her tone suggested it was more of a suggestion than a fact. We're as invisible as we're going to get. Let's hope the aliens are as gullible as we are, Garth murmured, eyes on his display. The luminary Sentinel drifted forward, its presence masked by the cloaking system's tenuous grip on reality. The blockade loomed ahead, a line of alien ships as unfriendly as a bouncer at the galaxy's least welcoming nightclub. Maintain course, Vesper instructed, her voice calm despite the tension crackling in the air. The crew watched the readouts with the kind of intensity usually reserved for discount sales and poker games. Minutes stretched like hours as the Sentinel crept closer to the blockade. Each meter covered a small victory in a war of nerves. And then the unexpected happened because, of course, it did. Captain, Marta said, her voice sharp with urgency, I'm picking up fluctuations in the cloak. Something's interfering with the field. Vesper's heart sank. Suggestions? Pray, Garth offered, not entirely joking. Marta was already working, her fingers a blur on the console. It's some kind of counter-detection system. They must have anticipated cloaking attempts. Brilliant, Vesper muttered, eyes fixed on the main screen. Options. Trying to stabilize the field, Marta replied, her voice tense. But it's like plugging a sieve with chewing gum. The ship shuddered as a ripple passed through the cloak, creating a momentary distortion that was as subtle as a slap in the face. Shit, Garth said, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine concern. They're going to see us. Not if I can help it, Marta shot back, tweaking settings with the kind of focus usually reserved for bomb defusal. Vesper considered their options, brain working overtime. Garth, be ready to initiate evasive maneuvers if needed. Already on it, he replied, hands poised over the controls. The ship inched forward, each second a small eternity. Tension coiled around the crew like a snake squeezing tighter with every passing heartbeat. "Almost there," Marta said through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the cloak stable. Just as they were about to breach the blockade, the cloak faltered again, a hiccup in the system that sent a shiver through the ship. "That can't be good," Garth noted, understating the obvious. Ahead, the alien ships adjusted slightly, their movements subtle but significant. It seemed their game of hide-and-seek was about to come to an abrupt end. "Brace for contact," Vesper ordered, her mind racing through contingency plans. But instead of the expected barrage of firepower, the alien ships held their position, watching but motionless, a predator assessing its prey. "Marta, any bright ideas?" Vesper asked, desperate for a miracle. "Trying something radical," Marta replied, fingers dancing across the interface. "Recalibrating the cloak to emit false signals, see if we can throw them off." "Risky," Garth commented, though his tone was more intrigued than judgmental. "Got a better plan?" Marta snapped, not pausing in her work. "Nope, I'm all for reckless improvisation," he replied, grinning despite the tension. The ship's systems whirred, the cloak flickering as Marta worked her magic, or whatever passed for it in space. "False signals engaged," Marta announced, her voice a mix of triumph and exhaustion. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the alien ships shifted again, this time repositioning away from the Sentinel, their attention drawn by the phantom signals. "It worked," Vesper breathed, barely daring to believe it. "We're not out of the woods yet," Garth reminded her, though his smile suggested a grudging admiration for their unlikely success. The luminary Sentinel slipped through the blockade, the alien ships none the wiser thanks to Marta's quick thinking. It was a narrow victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Once we're clear," Vesper instructed, "maintain heading and deactivate the cloak. Let's not push our luck more than necessary." As the ship cruised beyond the blockade, the tension eased, though the sense of relief was tempered by the knowledge that their triumph was temporary. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and their journey far from over. "Good work, team," Vesper said, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. "All in a day's chaos," Garth replied, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. Marta just nodded, her exhaustion evident but her pride unmistakable. "Next time we pull a stunt like this, remind me to ask for a raise." The luminary Sentinel continued its course, a lone outpost of human defiance in a universe that was as unforgiving as it was unpredictable. They had slipped the noose for now, but the real challenge would be staying one step ahead in the grand game of cosmic chess. "Captain," Garth said, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation, "do you think they'll ever stop underestimating us?" Vesper considered his question, a smile playing on her lips. "Let's hope not. Gives us the edge we need." And with that, the crew settled back into their rhythm, each of them knowing that while the universe might be vast and indifferent, they had one thing going for them: their insatiable, irrepressible humanity. And if that wasn't enough to get them through, at least they'd go down swinging. The luminary Sentinel cruised silently past the blockade, its hull barely holding together under the strain of cloak and counter-detection. The crew, once riding high on their daring escape, had slipped into a grimmer mood. As the stars drifted past, like faint glimmers of hope taunting them from afar, the weight of the mission settled heavily on their shoulders. Captain Vesper Callahan slouched in her chair, the leather groaning under her. "All right, folks," she announced, trying to sound upbeat but managing only to sound like she'd chugged a glass of disappointment. "Let's keep this tin can moving before the universe changes its mind about sparing us today." Lieutenant Garth Pillar, the resident master of sarcasm, glanced over from his console. "Spare us. I think it just hasn't gotten around to killing us yet. It's busy with other things, like deciding whether black holes are more fun than us." Marta Riggs, still riding the adrenaline crash from her on-the-fly miracle work, looked up from her station. "Next time, let's plan our mission around a system that doesn't have a death wish for us." Garth chuckled, though it was more of a dry cough. "You mean there's a place like that?" "I thought the galaxy had one setting: humans, please self-destruct." Vesper leaned forward, elbows on her knees, rubbing her temples like she might squeeze out a solution. We need to get that cloaking system checked out. It's like flying with a curtain you keep tripping over. Or a cloak with more holes than a politician's promise, Garth added. Maybe the AI can help, Marta suggested half-heartedly. It managed to learn sarcasm, so maybe it can figure out how not to get us killed, Vesper nodded. Right, AI got any ideas? The ship's AI, a voice that sounded suspiciously like an old professor who had given up hope on his students, crackled to life, recommending a complete overhaul of the cloaking system. Estimated time, 3 months. Success probability, 42%. Margin of error, plus or minus, we're all doomed, Garth whistled. There's AI optimism for you. Glad it's not in charge. We'd be dead by committee. Marta rolled her eyes. If we wait 3 months, we'll be a space ghost story by then, told around campfires by aliens with nothing better to do. Vesper sighed, her patience stretched thinner than their cloaking field. Let's be realistic. We can't rely on half-baked tech or AI optimism. We need a miracle, and fast. Garth glanced over at Marta. Got any more gum for plug duty? Fresh out, Marta replied, her smile crooked. Guess we'll have to improvise. Isn't that what we're best at? Garth leaned back, crossing his arms. That's why we have a reputation to maintain. Being a spectacular mess is our legacy. The captain stood, trying to shake off the defeat creeping into her bones. All right, let's focus on what we can control. Marta, keep tinkering with the cloaking system. Garth, monitor comms for any alien chatter. We need to know if we made headlines. Garth saluted lazily. Aye, Captain. Always wanted to be famous, just not under missing, presumed screwed. The briefing room, smelling of burnt coffee and cursed dreams, dissolved into the frantic energy of shifting priorities. Each crew member returned to their stations, the weight of the galaxy pressing down. Iors dragged on, tedium filled with the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Garth was hunched over his console, running his fingers through his hair in an attempt to untangle static. Got something, he announced, looking up. Alien chatter, and it's not about today's weather. Vesper leaned over his shoulder, peering at the screen. What are they saying? Please don't say they're planning a welcoming committee. More like a search party, Garth replied, his voice tinged with a wry resignation. Seems like they're not convinced we're ghosts just yet. Marta was at her console, fiddling with circuits and cables like a space-age MacGyver. Any chance we can convince them to look elsewhere? I'm working on it, Vesper said, her mind racing. If we can outsmart them long enough, maybe we can slip through their fingers for good. And then what? Garth asked, voice edged with skepticism. What's the grand plan once we've snuck past their bedtime patrol? Vesper paused, her silence speaking volumes. First step, survive. Second step, figure out how to make our next miracle look easy. Marta grimaced as another spark flew from her console. We could use a few more of those. Miracles, I mean, not sparks. Garth let out a laugh, though it was devoid of humor. Miracles usually come with a side of soul-crushing consequences, don't they? That's life, Vesper replied, her tone bleakly cheerful. We make our own luck, even if it's the kind that bites you in the ass. Just then the ship shuddered, a groan echoing through the hull. Lights flickered, casting shadows that danced mockingly on the walls. Vesper's heart skipped a beat, dread pooling in her stomach like cold lead. Status, she barked, fear sharpening her voice. Marta was already ahead, fingers flying over her console. Something's gone wrong. Powers draining faster than my patience with faulty tech. Garth's face was lit by his screen, reflecting the worry lines etched into his brow. Looks like the cloaks decided to have a tantrum. We might as well be waving glow sticks out the airlock. Vesper closed her eyes, taking a breath as if it might fill her with clarity. We've got to stabilize it or we're toast. Working on it, Marta replied, her frustration simmering just beneath her calm exterior. Garth glanced at Vesper, eyes narrowing. We need a distraction, something to buy us time. And what do you propose? Vesper asked, voice dry as dust. Fireworks, a distraction dance. Garth grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded a poor decision. In the absence of pyrotechnics, how about a hyperdrive pulse? We overcharge the engines, create a short burst. If it doesn't rip us apart, it might confuse their scanners. Marta looked up, skepticism written on her face. That's a hell of a risk. Vesper weighed her options, well aware they were slim to none. Do it. It's not like we have a better plan. On it, Garth replied, already entering commands. Let's hope our luck holds out. Vesper leaned back, the chair groaning its disapproval. And if it doesn't, Garth shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. Then we go out in a blaze of glory, the kind they might sing songs about. Bad songs, but songs. The crew steeled themselves, a collective breath held as Garth initiated the pulse. The ship vibrated, a deep rumble coursing through it like a giant's angry growl. Lights flickered again, leaving them in a strobe of panic and hope. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Marta muttered, coaxing the cloak as if it was a temperamental child. The ship's systems screamed, alarms blaring an angry symphony. Vesper clutched her armrests, teeth clenched. "Hold together." Just a little longer. The pulse rippled out, a shockwave that distorted the fabric of space around them. The crew braced for the fallout, the seconds stretching into eternity. And then, silence. The alarm ceased, the ship's system settling into an uneasy calm. Marta released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Cloak's stable, for now." Garth relaxed, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Guess we just invented a new term, clandestine overdrive." "Don't get too comfortable," Vesper warned, though relief tinged her voice. "We're not out of danger yet." "Always the optimist, Captain," Garth said, his sarcasm a comforting constant. "Someone has to be," Vesper replied, standing to survey the stars beyond. "Let's get moving. Marta, keep monitoring the cloak. Garth, keep an ear on those channels. I want to know if the aliens start singing our praises." "More likely they're plotting our demise," Garth quipped, turning back to his console. "But I'll keep you posted." The ship's engines hummed, a low purr of mechanical determination. The luminary Sentinel, a battered monument to human stubbornness, pressed onward, navigating the vast, uncaring expanse of space with little more than spite and hope. Time dragged on, the crew settling into a rhythm as they worked to outrun their past and evade their future. The universe, expansive and indifferent, loomed around them, a constant reminder of their insignificance. Vesper watched the stars, a silent sentinel against the void. "Do you think they'll ever give up?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. "I doubt it," Garth replied, not looking up from his work. "But maybe they'll get bored, move on to something more entertaining. Like watching paint dry," Marta suggested, her voice weary but light. Vesper smiled, a small gesture of defiance against the universe's indifference. "Here's hoping." The luminary Sentinel, battered but unbroken, continued its journey through the stars, a testament to human tenacity and the audacity to dream of survival in a galaxy determined to snuff them out. For now, they were still in the game, and as long as they had a hand to play, they would fight on. Vesper Callahan reclined in her captain's chair, squinting at the swirling stars outside the viewport. Her mind raced with half-formed plans, each more desperate than the last. The luminary Sentinel wasn't just a ship, it was a stubborn mule with engine troubles and a flair for the dramatic. "All right, everyone," she called, her voice carrying the authority of someone who knew she was grasping at straws. "I say we throw caution to the solar winds and get creative." Garth leaned against the console, smirking like a cat who'd just swallowed someone else's canary. "Creative as in let's paint the ship bright pink and hope the aliens have a sense of humor, creative or more. Let's use our limited resources and pray creative." Marta, brow furrowed in concentration, was already tinkering with a circuit board that looked more like a fried breakfast than a piece of technology. "If we had pink paint, I'd say go for it. But since we don't, I'll settle for using everything that isn't nailed down to patch this cloak." Vesper nodded, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Exactly. We need to think outside the box, a box that's on fire and about to be trampled by an alien armada." The ship's AI piped in with its usual chipper pessimism. May I remind you, Captain, that creativity with limited resources is statistically correlated with catastrophic outcomes. Noted AI, Vesper replied dryly. But catastrophic is about half a step down from where we currently stand. Garth tapped a few keys, pulling up schematics of the ship on his screen. We could siphon power from non-essential systems, like the coffee maker. That damn thing's been sabotaging morale for months with its burnt offering. He had a point. The coffee maker had been the bane of their existence, brewing sludge that was more reminiscent of industrial runoff than caffeine. Do it, Vesper ordered. And whatever else we can spare. We need to boost the cloak and keep this ship hidden. Marta's fingers danced over her console like a pianist at a concert. I'll reroute everything. Just don't ask where I'm pulling it from. The lights dimmed slightly, and the hum of the engines grew louder, resonating through the ship like a war drum. The luminary sentinel shuddered, protesting the sudden demands with a metallic growl. Vesper held her breath, waiting for the inevitable backlash from their makeshift engineering. Garth raised an eyebrow, glancing at Marta. How's that cloak looking now? Think it'll hold together, or should we start rationing air? Marta gave him a look that could wither flowers. It's not a miracle cure, but it's holding, at least until we hit another bump. Speaking of bumps, Garth said, eyes glued to the comm screen, our favorite interstellar voyeurs are on the move. Looks like they're gearing up for a closer look. Lucky us. Never a dull moment, Vesper murmured, shifting her gaze back to the stars. All right, let's keep them guessing. If they come poking around, we need to make sure they find a ghost ship with nothing of interest. Marta frowned, a thought striking her. I could set up a decoy signal, make it look like we're drifting dead in the water. Perfect, Vesper said, her grin feral. If they think we've already bitten the big one, they might leave us alone long enough to slip by. Or blast us to bits to make sure, Garth added, ever the optimist. Vesper shrugged. Nothing ventured, nothing vaporized. Let's give it a go. The crew moved with the kind of synchronicity born out of shared desperation, each knowing their role in this mad caper. As Marta configured the decoy, Garth monitored the alien chatter, his ears pricked for any sign of impending doom. Decoy's live, Marta announced, her voice a blend of relief and anxiety. Let's hope they buy it. The tension on the bridge was palpable, a tightrope walk over a chasm of uncertainty. Vesper paced, her eyes flitting between the viewport and the screens, searching for any hint of reaction from the alien fleet. Garth straightened suddenly, a crease forming between his eyebrows. They're slowing. Maybe they're just curious about the light show. Or maybe they like to play with their food, Marta muttered under her breath. The silence that followed was suffocating, every second an eternity stretched thin by fear and anticipation. Vesper's heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat of defiance. Then without warning the ship lurched violently, throwing everyone off their feet. Vesper crashed into her chair, barely managing to hold on. Garth cursed, a string of expletives that could strip paint. What the hell was that? Vesper demanded, her voice a whip crack of urgency. Marta scrambled back to her console, eyes wide with panic. Something's wrong, we're being pulled towards them. A tractor beam, fantastic, Garth groaned, rubbing his shoulder where he'd hit the deck. Just what we needed, an invitation to the intergalactic zoo. Vesper's mind raced, the pieces of a plan falling into place. We need to break free. Overload the engines, use the hyperdrive pulse again. Marta's expression was grim. That's a one-way ticket to exploding, Captain. Better than getting dissected, Garth countered, already moving to execute the plan. Do it, Vesper ordered, her jaw set. If we have to go down, let's do it on our terms. They worked with feverish intensity, the ship groaning under the strain of their desperation. The engines roared, the hull vibrating with the force of their defiance. The pulse hit like a tsunami, a massive surge of energy that wrenched the ship from the tractor beam's grasp. The luminary sentinel bucked wildly, hurtling through space like a comet on a collision course with fate. Vesper clung to her chair, her teeth rattling with the force of their escape. The viewscreen showed the stars blurring, a dizzying whirl of lights and shadows. Hold on, she shouted, though it was more a plea than a command. The ship shuddered violently, alarms screaming in protest. Vesper's vision blurred, the edges of consciousness fraying like an old tapestry, and then just as suddenly it was over. The ship settled, the engines purring with a grudging acceptance. Vesper blinked, her head spinning, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Garth looked around, his usual sardonic grin tempered by exhaustion. "We're clear." For now. Vesper let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, relief washing over her in a wave. "Status report." Marta checked her console, her fingers flying over the keys. "We're still in one piece, barely. The cloak's flickering like a bad neon sign, but it's there." "Good enough," Vesper said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Let's keep moving, put as much distance between us and them as possible." Garth settled back into his seat, his relief masked by a veneer of sarcastic bravado. "Next time, let's vacation somewhere less lethal, maybe a nice black hole." Vesper chuckled, the sound brittle but genuine. "I'll keep that in mind." The luminary sentinel, battered and bruised but unbroken, sailed through the void, a solitary speck of tenacity in a universe indifferent to their plight. They had survived another brush with death, and though the odds were still stacked against them, they were alive. For now, that was enough. As the ship slipped into the shadows of the cosmos, Vesper allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had outsmarted their pursuers, at least temporarily. It was a small victory, but in their line of work, small victories were all they could hope for. "Keep monitoring those signals," Vesper ordered, settling back into her chair. "And let me know the minute anything changes." "Aye, Captain," Garth replied, his tone mocking but affectionate. Marta leaned back, rubbing her temples as if she could massage away the stress. "I could use a nap or 7. Join the club," Vesper said, her eyes heavy with fatigue. "But we've got work to do, no rest for the wicked, as they say." "Wicked?" Garth interjected with a crooked smile. "More like stubborn as hell." Vesper didn't argue. They were a ragtag crew held together by duct tape, sarcasm, and sheer force of will. But they were alive, and as long as they drew breath, they'd keep fighting. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but the luminary sentinel would carve its path through the stars, a testament to humanity's refusal to go quietly into the night. As Vesper gazed out at the endless expanse, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, small and fragile, but real. They had survived the impossible more times than she could count. Who's to say they couldn't do it again? With a sigh, she turned her attention back to the task at hand. There were still battles to be fought, mysteries to be unraveled, and a future to secure. The galaxy might think it had them cornered, but it didn't know the tenacity of humanity. Not yet, anyway. The ship sailed on, the stars a silent chorus to their defiant journey. As long as they had each other and a single chance, they'd keep pushing forward, one step ahead of the darkness, one breath away from the edge. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn the universe's indifference into their advantage. After all, they had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The luminary sentinel creaked ominously, more of a haunted house than a sleek spacecraft. "Well, isn't this just the highlight of my miserable existence?" Vesper mumbled, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she surveyed the damage report flashing on the console. The ship's AI, more pessimistic than a funeral director, chimed in with its usual cheery voice. "Structural integrity at 47%. Recommend immediate evacuation or at least a really good insurance policy." Vesper snorted. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Hal. Remind me why we programmed you with an existential crisis again." Lieutenant Garth Pillar lounged in his chair, a picture of nonchalance despite the chaos. "Keeps us on our toes, Cap. Nothing says motivated workforce like an AI rooting for your early demise." Vesper couldn't argue with that. It had been a long, soul-crushing tour, and they were running on fumes, literally and metaphorically. But they'd survive, if only to spite the universe. Marta Riggs was hunched over her console, the glow of the screens highlighting the bags under her eyes. "I've got good news and bad news," she announced, not looking up. "Hit me with the bad," Vesper sighed, mentally bracing herself. "Looks like our tractor beam escape trick overloaded the hyperdrive. We're dead in the water until I can fix it, and that ain't happening with our current stash of duct tape and optimism." "Fantastic," Vesper muttered. "And the good news," Marta's lips quirked into a crooked smile. "We didn't explode." "Yet, I'll take it," Vesper replied, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The stress was a constant drumbeat in her head, each throb a reminder of how royally screwed they were. "All right, people, let's figure out our next play before the aliens decide to turn us into a science exhibit." Garth leaned forward, his expression a blend of mischief and mock seriousness. "How about we convince them we're harmless? You know, like a chihuahua with a loud bark and no bite." "Yeah, because they're definitely gonna buy that from a ship with a malfunctioning invisibility cloak," Marta quipped. "We're the opposite of inconspicuous." Vesper tapped her fingers on the armrest, her mind racing through options thinner than a starving mouse. "We need to send a message. Something that shows we're not a threat." "Maybe we should play dead," Garth suggested with a smirk. "Worked for my last relationship. Or we could show them what makes us human," Marta piped up, her voice tinged with a rare hint of optimism. "Our survival instinct. Our ability to come together when the chips are down." Vesper arched an eyebrow. "You think they'll see our ragtag band of misfits as an inspiration instead of competition?" Marta shrugged. "If not, we're back to plan A, not exploding." "All right," Vesper decided, clapping her hands together. "Let's show them what we're made of. Marta, get that hyperdrive working. We might need to make another quick getaway if they don't buy this." "Aye, Captain," Marta replied, already diving back into her console, her fingers a blur of desperation and determination. Garth rolled his eyes, but there was a glint of respect in his gaze. "And here I thought I'd signed up for a quiet tour of duty." "The quiet's overrated," Vesper shot back, grinning despite the odds. "Now let's put on a show they won't forget." As the crew set to their tasks, the ship itself seemed to rally, its beleaguered systems humming with renewed purpose. Vesper glanced out at the stars, their indifferent twinkle a reminder of the vastness they navigated. But there was a stubbornness in her heart, a refusal to be just another speck in the void. "All right, Garth," she called over her shoulder. "Let's get that message ready. Something that says we come in peace, but we're not as dumb as we look." Garth chuckled, his fingers dancing over the keys. "I'll try to keep it under 3 pages with a minimum of spelling errors." As the message took shape, Vesper felt a flicker of hope, small but persistent. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn this mess around. After all, they were human, cunning, tenacious, and stubborn to a fault. Marta's voice cut through her thoughts. "Hyperdrive's still fried, Captain, but I think I can jury-rig a solution. It's not pretty, but it's better than sitting here with our thumbs up our asses." "Do it," Vesper ordered. "And keep your fingers crossed." "Maybe we should pray to the coffee gods," Garth suggested with a wink. "Those bastards abandoned us ages ago," Marta grumbled, her expression darkening as she glanced at the defunct coffee maker. "I'm starting to think it's personal." Vesper shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. "Save the prayers for later. Right now, let's focus on not getting vaporized." The bridge settled into a tense rhythm, each crew member working with a mix of urgency and resignation. They were scrappy, outmatched, and dangerously low on resources, but they'd come this far. No point in giving up now. "Message ready, Captain," Garth announced after a while, his voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. "Let's hope they have a sense of humor." "Send it," Vesper ordered, her heart pounding in her chest. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. The alien ships hovered in the distance, a menacing presence that felt all too real. Vesper's hands clenched around the armrests of her chair, a white-knuckled grip of defiance. Then, the comms crackled to life, the aliens' reply a cacophony of clicks and hums that the AI translated with a surprising hint of excitement. "They acknowledge our message and request a meeting. Apparently, they are intrigued by our determination." "Intrigued," Garth echoed, his eyebrows shooting up. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said about us in a while." "Don't get too comfortable," Marta warned, her eyes fixed on her console. "They're still armed to the teeth." Vesper nodded, her mind racing through possibilities. We're not out of the woods yet. But maybe we've bought ourselves some time. The alien ship drifted closer, its silhouette a blot against the stars. Vesper watched it approach, her heart a tumult of fear and hope. This was it, a chance to prove that humanity was more than just a threat, that they had something worth offering. The alien voice returned, more measured this time. Your actions demonstrate potential for peace. We propose a ceasefire to discuss further. Looks like we might live to see another sunrise, Garth remarked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Vesper allowed herself a small, tight smile. Let's hope they don't change their minds. The next few hours unfolded in a blur, negotiations stretching like a rubber band ready to snap. Vesper remained on edge, her every sense attuned to the slightest hint of betrayal. But the aliens held their word, treating them with cautious curiosity rather than hostility. The turning point, it seemed, had been their willingness to risk everything. That reckless gamble, born out of desperation, had shown the aliens a side of humanity they'd overlooked, the capacity for self-sacrifice, a strength that went beyond mere survival. Guess they like their humans with a side of crazy, Garth commented, his voice breaking the tension as they waited for the final verdict. Marta snorted. We're not exactly the poster children for sanity, are we? Speak for yourself, Garth shot back, grinning. Vesper shook her head, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. They don't know what they are missing. As the negotiations came to a close, the alien commander, a creature with more eyes than seemed strictly necessary, appeared on the screen. We believe there is potential for peace. Your actions have demonstrated a possible path forward. Vesper nodded, keeping her relief in check. We'll work to maintain that path. Let's show the universe we're not just a bunch of reckless idiots. Though we do have our moments, Garth added, earning a glare from Marta. Indeed, the alien commander replied, its voice tinged with something that might have been amusement. We will observe, but for now the blockade will not engage with your vessel. As the screen went dark, Vesper exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was a small victory, but in a universe that seemed determined to squash them, it felt monumental. The crew relaxed, the tension that had bound them together finally loosening its grip. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide with sheer audacity and a hint of insanity. Drinks on me, Garth declared, earning a round of cheers and groans in equal measure. Better be real booze this time, Marta grumbled, though her tone was light. Vesper smiled, the warmth of camaraderie washing over her like a balm. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by spit and spite, but they'd made it this far. And with any luck, they'd keep going, carving their path through the stars with a stubbornness that bordered on the absurd. Let's get this ship fixed up, she ordered, settling back into her chair. We've got a lot of work ahead. The crew dispersed, energy renewed despite the odds. Vesper watched them go, her heart full of a fierce pride. They might be flawed, but they were hers, and together they were unstoppable. As the luminary sentinel sailed on, the universe stretched out before them, vast and indifferent. But for the first time in a long time, Vesper felt a flicker of something more than defiance, a hope, fragile and tenacious, that refused to die. The stars beckoned, a challenge and a promise wrapped in one. And with her crew beside her, Vesper was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Because if there was one thing she'd learned, it was that humanity was at its best when its back was against the wall, and they had no intention of backing down. Vesper Callahan slouched in her captain's chair like she was born to it, staring at the view screen where the alien blockade once loomed like a cosmic middle finger. Now it was more of a tentative high five. Can you believe it? Garth Pillar leaned against the console, sipping something that could have been coffee or engine degreaser. Those aliens just lifted the blockade. We're free as a bird in a cage that's suddenly missing a wall. Marta Riggs was elbow-deep in the hyperdrive's guts, her hands working like a puppet master on a caffeine binge. Free to what? Crash and burn somewhere new, she muttered, yanking out a charred circuit board. Pass me the duct tape, would you? Garth tossed the tape over, his smirk a permanent fixture. Duct tape, holding the universe together since forever. Universe's best damn adhesive, Marta replied, with the reverence usually reserved for deities or particularly good martinis. Vesper chuckled, a dry sound that said she wasn't sure if they'd just pulled off a miracle or postponed their inevitable explosion. At least they didn't vaporize us. That's progress. Garth raised his mug in salute. To not being space dust, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Vesper said, trying to sound pragmatic but failing miserably at hiding her relief. Aliens are fickle as hell. They might change their minds and decide we're better off as interstellar graffiti. No need to be such a ray of sunshine, Captain. Garth grinned. Sorry, it's my default setting, Vesper replied, shifting her gaze back to the stars. They seemed a little less indifferent, maybe even curious. All right, let's see what this new era of cooperation looks like. Could be the start of something good. Or a really elaborate trap. Always the optimist, Marta quipped, fixing yet another piece of the hyperdrive with the enthusiasm of someone assembling furniture without an instruction manual. Vesper sighed, a sound like a reluctant concession to hope. We've got our foot in the door, might as well see what's on the other side. The comms crackled, the ship's AI, Hal chirping in with synthetic cheer. Captain, incoming communication from the alien coalition. They wish to discuss terms of cooperation and integration. Tell them we're busy, Garth joked, earning a glare from Vesper. Patch it through, Hal, Vesper instructed, sitting up straighter. Let's hear what our new friends want. The alien leader's holographic image flickered into view, more eyes than a can of worms, but somehow managing to look dignified. Greetings, human vessel. We acknowledge your tenacity and wish to extend an invitation to join a council of interspecies cooperation. Vesper tried to play it cool, managing to keep the excitement out of her voice. Appreciate the offer. What's the catch? No catch, merely an opportunity to share knowledge and resources, the alien replied, its voice like 1,000 marbles rolling in harmony. Your species has shown resilience and adaptability, traits we value, traits often confused with stupidity and recklessness, Garth muttered. Vesper shot him a look that said not now, though her lips twitched with a suppressed smile. Well, we're not known for turning down free food, so count us in, Vesper said, exuding the casual bravado of someone who'd just been invited to a party they'd crashed. We anticipate our alliance will benefit all parties involved, the alien leader stated, a hint of curiosity in its multitude of eyes. After the transmission ended, Garth leaned back, arms crossed. So what's next, Captain? We gonna be the galaxy's friendly neighborhood humans. Sounds adorable, Marta snorted. Like a pet that might bite. Maybe we can show them we're more than just a wild card in this cosmic poker game, Vesper mused, her mind already jumping ahead to possibilities. We've proven we're more than just a problem to contain. Let's just hope the aliens don't decide to fold us the moment we screw up, Garth said with a wink. Optimism, Lieutenant, Vesper replied dryly. We're gonna need a lot of it. The rest of the crew began filtering in, each bearing signs of the scrappy battle they'd just fought against fate and sometimes each other. But there was a glimmer in their eyes, a spark that said they'd come through it together. Vesper addressed them, her voice firm despite the chaos that had been their constant companion. We've got a shot at something bigger, a chance to be more than just a race of stubborn misfits. Time to show them what we're made of. The crew cheered, a ragged sound of camaraderie and defiance. For a moment, the luminary sentinel felt less like a tin can in space and more like a home. All right, Vesper continued, let's get this ship operational. We've got a meeting to attend, and I'd rather not show up looking like we just crawled out of a junkyard. Speak for yourself, Marta called, brandishing a wrench like a scepter. I consider this battle-worn chic, Garth snorted. More like space hobo couture. Whatever we call it, let's make it work, Vesper interjected, trying to sound commanding, though her grin threatened to break through. We're not just representing ourselves anymore. We've got to show them humanity at its best, or at least not at its worst, Garth quipped. As the crew dispersed to their tasks, Vesper felt the weight of the universe press down a little less harshly. They were rough around the edges, a mess of flaws and brilliance, but damn if they weren't impressive in their own chaotic way. Hours later, the luminary sentinel was as ready as she was ever going to be. Sure, there were parts held together by hope and the interstellar equivalent of chewing gum, but she was functional. Mostly. "Looks like we're good to go," Marta declared, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit which had long since given up any claim to cleanliness. "Good enough as we ever are," Vesper agreed, her voice tinged with affection for her ship and her crew. They might be the underdogs, but they were her underdogs. "All right," she called as she settled back into her chair. "Time to see what this cosmic council has in store for us." The ship thrummed to life, engines purring like a contented cat, or a really well-fed space lion roaring into the unknown. The stars drifted past, indifferent as always, but for once they didn't feel so distant. As they approached the alien council's designated meeting point, a mix of trepidation and excitement buzzed through the ship. Vesper stole a glance at her crew, seeing in their faces the same conflicting emotions she felt. They were stepping into the great unknown, a place of potential and peril in equal measure. "It's like the first day of school," Garth said, rolling his eyes. "Except with more aliens and fewer uniforms. And no recess," Marta added, her voice carrying a hint of wistfulness. "Focus, people," Vesper snapped, though there was no real bite in her words. "Let's not embarrass ourselves before we even get started." The luminary sentinel slid into position alongside a fleet of alien vessels, each one as strange and varied as the species they represented. The sight was awe-inspiring and mildly terrifying, like being the smallest kid on the playground surrounded by much taller, more colorful children. Vesper squared her shoulders, a gesture of determination more for herself than anyone else. "Here goes nothing," she murmured, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The alien leader appeared on the screen once more, its expression as inscrutable as ever. "Welcome, Captain Callahan." "Are you prepared for the proceedings?" "We are," Vesper replied, projecting confidence she only half felt. "Ready as we'll ever be." "Excellent. Let us begin the discussions," the alien leader said, its voice a calm ocean of sound. The meeting stretched on, a complex ballet of diplomacy and negotiation that required all of Vesper's wit and cunning. The aliens were cautious, testing the waters of this new alliance with the care of someone handling a live grenade. As the talks progressed, Vesper found herself surprisingly adept at maneuvering through the intricacies of interspecies politics. Maybe it was her experience wrangling her own crew, or perhaps her innate stubbornness served her well here. Either way, she navigated the proceedings with a mix of charm and tenacity. "Who would have thought we'd end up here?" Garth whispered during a brief recess, his voice full of wonder. "Certainly not me," Vesper replied, her eyes scanning the room. "But we're here, and we're making it work." The discussions wrapped up with a tentative agreement, a framework for cooperation that would see humanity joining the ranks of the Galactic Council. It was a historic moment, one that could reshape the future for everyone involved. "Congratulations, Captain," the alien leader said as the meeting concluded. "We look forward to seeing how humanity contributes to our shared endeavors." Vesper nodded, a mixture of pride and relief washing over her. "We'll do our best to live up to your expectations." As the team returned to the luminary sentinel, the reality of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. They'd done it, pulled off the impossible once more, carving a path forward for humanity in a universe that had seemed determined to swallow them whole. "Not bad for a day's work," Marta said, her voice full of satisfaction. "Not bad at all," Vesper agreed, a smile breaking through her usual mask of cynicism. The crew gathered in the common area, a place that had seen more than its fair share of chaos and camaraderie. Drinks were poured, real ones this time, salvaged from the depths of their reserves, and a toast was raised. "To the future," Garth declared, his voice carrying the weight of all they'd been through. "May it be less of a dumpster fire than the past." "Here's hoping," Vesper said, clinking her glass against his. As laughter and conversation filled the room, Vesper allowed herself a moment to appreciate what they'd achieved. The universe was vast and indifferent, but they'd managed to carve out a place for themselves within it. A place where they could be more than just survivors, where they could thrive. "I think we're going to be okay," Marta said, her voice soft and full of wonder. Vesper nodded, her heart full of a fierce hope. "Yeah, I think we just might be." The stars awaited, a tapestry of possibility stretched out before them. With her crew by her side, Vesper was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was defying the odds with a stubbornness that bordered on the absurd. And they planned to continue doing just that, one star at a time.